How's it going, guys? Lou here to do a breakdown of the NFL 1.5 million Saturday special for the wildcard round this week. Going to go into my favorite plays, some lineup constructions, and some pretty good value plays that I think are viable for this slate. And we're going to do the best we can to break it down and try to build a lineup that's going to win us $500,000. So let's just get right into the analysis here. So first guy up we have is Lamar Jackson. I think it's no secret that he's probably the highest ranked quarterback on the slate this weekend, this Saturday. One thing to note about Lamar, I'm going to try to get into some metrics here and some information to help you guys make the determination of whether or not you want to put him into your lineup. But looking at the game script and potential matchup for him, the Steelers run single high safeties, the second most in the NFL, and Lamar is actually the highest graded quarterback at that type of coverage, which is a pretty good matchup for him. On the receiving side of the ball, Mark Andrews also does well against that type of coverage, so could be someone to pair him with Lamar. But in terms of offensive line for these guys, they have really good metrics. I'm seeing right here. Not the best run blocking team on the slate, and they're going up against a pretty good run defense. But overall, no worries about how they grade out versus a pretty strong Steelers defense. Next guy up, we have Justin Herbert taking on the Houston Texans. So it seems like as of late, he's been throwing the ball a lot more than he was earlier in the year. He's got weapons developing such as Ladd McConkey and Quentin Johnston, and I would even consider Will Dissly a pretty good weapon. On the running back front, they got J.K. Dobbins back, so their star running back helped them balance out the game a little more. The Chargers are tied for the best pass blocking advantage on the slate for what that's worth. Second lowest run blocking advantage also for what that's worth. We can get into the individual matchups for wide receiver later in a bit, but just on the way Herbert's been playing as of late, I don't see a reason why you wouldn't play him, scoring 23, 24, 31 fantasy points the past 3 games. I know a lot of people are expecting the Chargers to win this game. I do think that the Texans are going to make this closer than what people are anticipating. But based on recent form, it's hard not to run a Charger stack out there with Herbert at quarterback. Considering what we have for cheaper options here. It's only $500 more than CJ Stroud, gives you a little more mobility than CJ Stroud. But this game does project to be lower scoring than the Steelers and Ravens, although most of the points coming on the Ravens side, and this game is only projected to be 1 less point than the other game. But definitely see Herbert as a pretty good option here for this slate. Now, I really want to try and make the case for CJ Stroud because I love him as a player. I think he's a great player. I think everyone in the fantasy community is over-indexing on the Chargers blowing the Houston Texans out. I don't think that's going to happen. I think DeMeco Ryan is a good coach, and he will find a way to keep this game close. But CJ Stroud does not have a good pass blocking advantage. The silver lining here is that the Chargers have the worst pass rush on the slate per PFF. Only a few points, but they also get Deontay Johnson. They ran him out there at 37% of the snaps last week. I think if they want to win this game, he should be on the field a lot more. I know that Deontay Johnson failed with the Baltimore Ravens. For whatever reason, we don't know the exact details. I'm assuming it's because he wanted to have a larger role than what they were giving him, and he wasn't happy about it, and they let him go. I think he's still a good enough football player where he can impact a team and make plays. We saw him do it earlier this year with Bryce Young while Bryce Young was actually struggling. So I do think that Deontay will give CJ Stroud a boost here. And the fact that Nico Collins is a really good wide receiver and he's got a pretty advantageous matchup. So I would look to CJ Stroud going to Nico a lot and also Deontay Johnson a lot. Dalton Schultz, not so much. And Joe Mixon does not have a very good path ahead of him to be a productive running back this week. Last quarterback to break down here is Russ. Again, kind of similar to CJ Stroud, it is hard to make the case for Russ here. The only thing he has going for him is that he generally plays better against man than zone. And Baltimore runs man at a pretty high clip. So I think that gives guys like Freiermuth typically does well against coverage like this. George Pickens, I don't know where the disconnect is between these two. Hopefully they get on the same page for the playoffs here because they're going to need to score points. And it's definitely a matchup where Pickens can have his way. We'll get into the case for George Pickens a little later, but I think you can make the case for all these quarterbacks based on recent form. Obviously, Russ, I'm a little more hesitant with. Obviously, feel more comfortable with these two guys, Lamar and Herbert versus Stroud and Wilson. But if I had to rank the four, I do kind of have to agree with how they appear here in terms of salary, with Lamar at 1, Herbert at 2, Stroud at 3, and Russ at 4. But my gut is telling me that CJ Stroud is going to perform above expectation. He's a very competitive guy. He wants to win. He gets another weapon. I'll probably be having some lineups with CJ Stroud in there. Also, it's pretty easy to project where that ball is going to go in the offense. It's pretty much 3 guys. It's going to be Nico, it's going to be Deontay if he's on the field, and it's going to be Joe Mixon. At the running back position, I don't think I really need to make the case for Derrick Henry. He's clearly the best running back on the slate. Fade him at your peril, but without Zay Flowers on the field, the offense is going to run through Lamar. It's going to run through Derrick Henry, sprinkle in some of the other guys to make big plays. But Derrick Henry, he's going to get a lot of touches. He's got a good matchup against the Steelers, even though the Steelers have a good defense. Ravens have a great graded offensive line, and he should have some room to run. Joe Mixon does not have a good matchup ahead of him. He's got the worst graded offensive line in terms of run blocking. The only thing saving Joe Mixon is his role, and that it is very clear that he is going to get all the touches. He's going to get all of the carries while game script allows him to. If the Chargers actually don't blow them out of this game, he's going to get plenty of targets out of the backfield, so we know he's a good receiver. I think his floor there in terms of getting targets is great to have. And he has had ceiling games. We have seen close to 30-point games against teams, although they were teams that aren't generally good against the run or running backs in general. But this is a playoff game. You need to find a way to get your best players the ball and have them make plays. So even though Joe Mixon doesn't have the greatest matchup ahead of him, I do think he's worth playing. I'll briefly touch on guys like J.K. Dobbins. Coming back from an injury, played the last 2 weeks, just not very efficient, not getting many targets, and they do get Gus Edwards back. Whether they want to mix him in or not, especially in the red zone, once they get closer to the goal line, I'm not sure. But Justin Herbert's clearly a great quarterback. They might just put the ball in his hands and have him make plays with his wide receivers. But Dobbins, I think, is going to be a popular play. I'm going to pump the brakes a little bit on him just because it could potentially be a split workload. I think Houston's generally been pretty decent against the run. So I think I'm gonna look elsewhere when it comes to running back, but I will have some fair shares of J.K. Dobbins. And then Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris. It's just really hard to project whose role is going to be the more dominant. Last week we saw Najee have double the carries as Jaylen Warren. Najee had 5 targets. Warren had 1 target, but the game before, the few games before, he had at least 5 in both. So it's really hard to project. I don't think that they draw a very good matchup. I don't think that the game script really favors them, but they're cheap enough, especially Najee, only $5K, where you could consider them for your lineup. And the other higher price running backs aren't in great matchups. So if they score similarly, I'm talking about this group of 4 right here. If they score similarly and you paid for Najee Harris, you have extra salary to pay up for the wide receivers or Lamar. This one's really tough to break down. First up is Nico Collins for wide receivers. Clearly, CJ Stroud's number 1 target. Does really well against zone coverage. Chargers run zone coverage a lot. I think he's probably one of the best wide receiver plays on the slate. Obviously, the salary is saying that. I think he's worth paying for. I think he's worth stacking with CJ Stroud. He's an explosive player. We saw what he did earlier this year before he got hurt. And even when he came back, he has the opportunity to give you that ceiling game. So I'll be looking into Nico a lot. Next up, we have Ladd McConkey. Seems like a lot of his snaps are projected to go against Kamari Lassiter. Seen the least amount of snaps against Derek Stingley. So I think that does not bode well for Quentin Johnston. I think Ladd is going to be a great play against similar style defenses. He's gone for, on average, close to 100 yards. Clearly turning into Justin Herbert's top target. I compare him very similar to Nico. I think you can find ways to get Ladd and Nico into both your lineups, or into your lineups. So Ladd, a great play as well. Pickens, we kind of touched upon it when we were talking about Russ. Does well against the type of coverage that Baltimore runs, so that's man. Has good history against Brandon Stevens. Collectively, over all of his snaps, he's got close to 150 yards. In my best ball drafts, Pickens was going nearly towards the end, but he could be that guy in the wild card round to have a really big game, but their team loses and they just don't advance. He did it in the playoffs a couple of years ago. He went for like 38 fantasy points. Russ has to figure out the connection with him really quick because Baltimore is going to put up points and Pittsburgh really needs to hang in with them. Rashad Bateman finds himself in the wide receiver 1 role now that Zay Flowers has been ruled out. So once we saw Zay out, we saw Rashad Bateman take on a larger role. Got 8 targets last game. I'm a little worried about Bateman, even though he's the number 1 wide receiver target there. That offense is going to run through Lamar running. It's going to run through Henry running. And I think that Lamar feels very comfortable going to Mark Andrews, who has a good matchup based on his skill set and the type of defense that he'll be seeing. Even though the Steelers' corners is a weakness, and Bateman is considered to have a good matchup, and considering his salary is really cheap, I feel like this could be somewhat of a trap. I'm not telling you to completely fade him, but I would maybe temper expectations a little more than what we're initially forecasting here. I really want to love Quentin Johnston. After his 13 catch, 186-yard performance, it's a little hard to get excited about him squaring up with Stingley. Also, this Q tag is not really helping his cause here. Thigh injury, I don't know how serious it is, but based on his game last week, it didn't seem to be too serious. But 14 targets we saw, his volume is also increasing. Totally viable to have a Justin Herbert stack doubled with McConkey and Johnston, even triple with Will Dissly. My only concern is that Will Anderson's probably going to disrupt things, maybe make life difficult for Justin Herbert, and that's going to be the way that they're going to slow this offense down. All of the other wide receivers on the slate are just ancillary pieces to offenses that are somewhat consolidated and easily projectable. But I do want to talk about Deontay Johnson. The Texans want to win this game. They brought in a playmaker. He's really cheap. He played, I can't remember if it was either 27% of the snaps or 37% of the snaps last week. Got him involved in the offense. Obviously only 2 catches for 12 yards. But if you have a defense and you have a guy like Nico Collins, I'm pretty sure that defense is going to want to take away that offense's best weapon, and that's Nico. It's going to be a hard thing to do, but if they try to, that should leave some looks open for Deontay Johnson. And if I were an NFL coach looking at the talent on my roster at wide receiver and having someone like Deontay Johnson, I would want to get him on the field as much as possible. So even though Deontay's had a lot of bad energy lately after his stint with the Ravens, after being traded by the Panthers, I'm going to be looking to him here, believe it or not. So first tight end we'll touch upon is Mark Andrews. Does really well against single high coverage. Per PFF, he ranks first among qualifying tight ends in yards per route run when the QB's pressured. And Pittsburgh is a defense that pressures the quarterback at a very high rate. Zay Flowers is out. Mark Andrews' role and reliance for offensive success only increases. He scored a touchdown in the past 7 games. They're giving him carries. It is hard not to like Mark Andrews here this week. Pat Freiermuth, also good against man coverage. Ravens run man a lot. Freiermuth's role is very secure, seeing a lot of targets from Russ. If the Steelers want to keep this game competitive, they're going to need to look to him, and they're going to need to look to George Pickens. Dalton Schultz usually does better against man. Schematically, the Chargers run zone, which does not bode well for him. The only thing saving him is the projected volume now that Tank Dell is out. So Schultz is going to be on the field. He's going to see targets, but just do know it's not the greatest matchup for him in terms of his skill set. Will Dissly was injured for a few weeks, came back week 17, scored a touchdown last week on 6 targets, got 5 receptions for 42 yards. Typically not a guy that's going to go over 100 yards, give you a massive game, but can he do something similar to last week and have 2 touchdowns? Yeah, definitely. He's involved in the offense. He's probably the 3rd target outside of McConkey and Quentin Johnston. If the Texans do decide to key in on one of those 2, could create more looks for Will Dissly. So I think he's a decent tight end play as well. Last but not least, Isaiah Likely gets a bump up in terms of targets because of the Zay Flowers injury. I consider him the wide receiver 2 on the team, even though he's a tight end. I would even contend that he's maybe even wide receiver 1, or 1A, 1B with Rashad Bateman. But I don't think it's out of the question for Likely to have a pretty high-scoring game. We saw his massive game against Kansas City the first week. I think a lot of people flocked to him and thought he was going to be the greatest tight end this year. Didn't turn out to be a sustainable scoring for him, but yeah, with the Zay Flowers out, the case could be made for him to get plugged in at tight end. So now you're all probably wondering, who do we pick? You just made the case for pretty much every single player on the slate. And I know, and I'm sorry that I did. But we will build, or attempt to build, a sample lineup using all the information that I just gave you and what we know now. So, at quarterback, it's very hard not to play Lamar. We can see what he's done in the past. But if Lamar just does have an average day, and Lamar has a 25-point game, and CJ Stroud has an 18-point game, the extra $2,500 in salary could be worth it. Obviously, it would be worth it. So I'm going to trust my gut on this one. I know the data doesn't really support CJ Stroud here having a big day, but I just like how projectable that offense is. And I like the matchup that Nico Collins has. And I like the cheapness of Deontay Johnson. Hard to project how much he's going to be on the field. I'm not sure, but we'll see. I think the Steelers have the softest offense on the slate. I think the Ravens have probably the best defense on the slate. I think it's easy to plug the Ravens in there. I think this is a slate probably where you run 2 tight ends. Mark Andrews definitely has the best matchup right here. I also think this is a slate where you run double tight end. Which makes this difficult to project right here of what to do. But I do know that I want Derrick Henry. I do know I would love to fit Mixon and McConkey, but looks like that's pretty ambitious right now. So let's just say if we plugged in likely, what does salary look like here? So we won't be able to get both McConkey and Mixon. We're off by $600. So let's see, what does this look like when we take the defense out? Okay, I'll just do something that probably a lot of people aren't going to do, and that's play the Texans defense. I'm making a stand that the Texans are not going to be as bad as everyone thinks, which gives me $400 salary to get somebody for $3,600. I could go all in with the Texans here and just say I'm going to get all of the points from Mixon, Collins, Deontay Johnson, and Dalton Schultz. But Schultz does not have the greatest matchup here. So, what could I do? I really like McConkey. I also like Pickens. Perhaps they're interchangeable. It still doesn't get me to Pat Freiermuth. Whew, this is tough. All right, had to pause, had to shift some things around. I think this is going to be it. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to be a lineup that I'm super confident in playing. Let's build one that we will be confident playing after this. But if you want to get different, I think this is something that probably not a lot of people will be doing. Steelers defense, Mike Tomlin's a great coach. Great coaches get their team to play and rise to the occasion. Why not just plug them in? Gives you access to all of these players that have phenomenal roles with their offenses, right? You get a bell cow out of Henry. You get a bell cow out of Mixon. You get a huge target earner out of Nico. Get a huge target earner out of potentially Andrews. Pickens, they're going to need him to step up. Simple. The only worry I have is just not having any of these Chargers players if this game does become a shootout. You do want that correlation. But let's see if we can get that on the other side. Building a Justin Herbert triple with McConkey. Build that with McConkey. We'll build it with Quentin. And let's build it with Disley. All right. And let's get our Ravens defense here. And let's get our Mark Andrews. Where is he? Let's get our Mark Andrews flex. All right, we have 6,800 bucks. Let's get us a cheap Najee Harris. Let's get us a Nico. And that still doesn't do it for us to get Henry. But we got 400 bucks. Throw in the Chargers D. And there we go. We have a Herbert, McConkey, Johnston, Disley correlated with Nico. And then we have a Harris. We have a Henry. We have an Andrews. The other thing we can do here is we'll flip Andrews. This gives me my guy Deontay. Right? Boom. I know it doesn't completely make sense to take this defense with Deontay and with Nico Collins, but play to win. If you have a stand, make it. Get the guys that you want in your lineup, but these are the types of configurations that I'll be going for tomorrow. So I'll be entering 5 lineups, 100 bucks total. We'll come back Sunday, see what went right, what went wrong. And tomorrow I'll have a video out for the Millie Maker contest, let you know my thoughts there and some of the insights that I've gotten from all my data sources. And we'll try to win $1 million the next day. So, guys, thanks for watching. It's been a lot of fun doing this the past couple weeks. Plan to do this till the end of time. And in the meantime, if you can give me a comment, if you can give me a subscribe if you haven't already, that'd be greatly appreciated. Close to 100 subscribers. So once we get there, I will take every username who's public that's commented or subscribed to my channel, and we'll be doing a $20 giveaway. You can use that money to enter a contest, do whatever you want with it. But thanks guys for watching. We'll be back tomorrow for some more breakdowns for the Sunday slate, and best of luck if you're playing.